One day, it will be gone. There will be no more dawns and sunsets, and no more springtimes to end the frozen winter. No more blue skies, no more starry nights, no more fears, and no more joys. Doomsday will have come and gone, and the earth will be no more.
Things will get from bad to worse, especially with the fuel crisis as it is now.
I do think that we are faced with a nuclear war. We are faced with natural calamities, epidemics. All kinds of things are going wrong with this world.
We take everything from the earth. We rob it with the oil, the gas, all the minerals and everything, and we don't give nothing back.
We're living on a world of finite resources, and with population growing the way it is, something has got to give, and probably we're not going to find the solution before the civilization is destroyed.
We are indeed in for something resembling doomsday.
Doomsday, the end of the world. Why is there such a strong feeling that we stand on the brink of catastrophe? Why is it on the minds of so many people? Perhaps on all our minds. Maybe it starts with the way we see ourselves as part of the universe. Because today, we all know a lot more about how that universe began and about how it might end. Scientists now believe the universe began about 12 billion years ago with a tremendous burst of energy, a big bang. Out of the nothingness of space, this awesome energy suddenly issued forth, an energy beyond human comprehension. It filled all that was and expanded with incredible momentum. The universe as we know it, from the smallest proton to the greatest galaxy, thus came into being. Eventually, this cosmic explosion stretched itself across space, forming the stars, endless billions of stars. Internationally acclaimed astronomer and author, Dr. George Abel.
In one galaxy, rather recently in the age of the universe, a particular star formed about 4.5 billion years ago. And that star was our sun. It formed from a great cloud of interstellar gas, and also at the same time the Earth and other planets formed. The Earth is made an abode of life by virtue of the energy that comes from the sun, energy coming from the great nuclear furnace in the sun's center. But that nuclear supply is finite. Eventually, the sun will use up its fuel at its very center. As a consequence, the sun is going to expand, becoming an enormous red giant. The sun's surface will reach out beyond the planet Venus, and possibly even beyond the planet Earth. If it does, of course, that's the end of the Earth. But even if it doesn't happen, it's the end of life on Earth as we know it, because certainly the intense amount of radiation will cook us.
How long will it be before the Earth is gone? Scientists estimate about 5 billion years. And that's how it may happen, one day in the future. Still, that doesn't seem to be the sort of doomsday that each generation dreads. We don't fear a doomsday billions of years in the future. We fear an immediate one. A day when the Earth opens, swallows us, and closes again. A day when a great comet crashes into the Earth and reduces it to dust. A day when the sky catches fire and the land sinks and the oceans rise. In a sense, each of these doomsdays has already happened for millions of people. It happens when an earthquake levels a city, leaving millions to sift through the piled rubble. It happens when a volcano erupts, covering the landscape with molten lava and threatening all in its awesome path. It happens when a monstrous tidal wave crashes against our vulnerable coastline. In the midst of an electrical storm, doom threatens. And those caught in the path of a hurricane or tornado catch a glimpse of doomsday. If they're lucky, they survive. Ultimately, man may not go out with the universe. He may not wait for the sun to run down. He may destroy the balance of nature. He may destroy himself. Is there then a pattern, a timetable? Has the countdown to doomsday indeed already begun? Millions of people believe in another kind of doomsday, one foretold in the scriptures, a day when all things will be judged, and each act of good and evil will be called to account. Biblical predictions go back to the dawn of recorded history. The prophet Enoch reflected on the end of time. The Lord will come with 10,000s of his saints and bring judgment on the world. Later in the Bible, the disciples Matthew and Luke prophesied, "Nation will rise against nation, kingdom shall rise against kingdom. Great earthquakes shall be in diverse places, and famines and pestilences and fearful sights and great signs shall there be from the heavens." John the mystic in the book of Revelations saw before man a great battle on the field of Armageddon, where the forces of good and evil would meet in a final confrontation. After the time of Christ, the prophecies continued, although they were no longer a part of the scriptures. Among the later prophets, there was a physician who holds a certain fascination. His name was Michel de Notre Dame, known to his followers as Nostradamus. In the mid-16th century, he predicted, "A horrible war in the Occident draws near. Fugitives, aerial warfare above the bayonets, sport of ravens neighboring the conflict, when Mercury and Jupiter are in France. He also predicted, "From the Aryan heights there shall arise one both elevated and obscure. His evil will affect the country when the child of Germany observes no law." The followers of Nostradamus believe he successfully predicted World War I and World War II centuries before they occurred. They also believe Nostradamus fixed a doomsday date for the late 20th century, the year 1999. If the predictions of the early prophets and philosophers on the end of the world are correct, how will it happen? Will man destroy himself in war or defoliate the planet, asphyxiating himself? Will he turn the oceans into cesspools, the skies into gas chambers? Or will man just drive himself mad with the ever-increasing complexity of his society? To men like noted author and psychologist Dr. Sam Keen, the study of the conflicting forces within man reveals our innermost fears.
We're living under the threat of apocalypse, and for the first time it's real. And so that brings a kind of crisis in hope. How can we hope in a future when over our head is hanging the possibility of nuclear destruction, or of ecological destruction, or of the decline of the families and of the networks which hold life and make it tangible and rich and worth living?
And so it would seem we do have ample reason to fear the end of our world. We fear for the communities in which we live. We fear for our friends and for our families. And we fear our children will inherit a world balanced on the edge of disaster as precariously as a circus performer on a tightrope. The ancient sorcerers, prophets, and philosophers are gone. But their fears of Earth being devastated by powers beyond our control still linger with us. Today's doomsday prophets, scientists, scholars, and specialists in every field, focus directly on man's selfish progress and what he is doing to planet Earth. The ecological balance that makes life on this planet possible is very fragile, very delicate. If we continue to assault it with ruthless technology, we run the risk of causing irreparable damage. And then we will know what all the predictions of the past may have been trying to tell us. That as soon as man gained the power to do so, he himself would destroy the world. And the doomsday countdown continues. It may be the nuclear bomb that confronts civilization with the specter of disaster, but the path to doomsday did not begin in the 20th century. It started thousands of years ago, when primitive cavemen first battled over food and territory. When the Romans conquered the then known world, chariots and catapults were the tools of destruction. In the 5th century, Rome fell to barbarian hordes, and Europe sank into the Dark Ages. In the 12th century, the Western world was divided into feudal groupings. Battles were frequent but small. The church dominated all thought. With the discovery of the New World, the weapons of warfare took on new dimensions. With the development of the airplane, the menacing technology of warfare advanced. Man entered a new era of terrifying dimension. Summer of 1945, one of the most awesome armadas in all history converged on Japan. The Japanese, driven slowly from island to island by Allied forces in the Pacific, retreated homeward. It was estimated that a total victory over the Japanese could not be accomplished by conventional warfare without an effort lasting several years and with a heavy loss of human life. The dropping of 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki changed the ways of conventional warfare and brought us a step closer to doomsday. So awed were the rulers of Japan by the devastating effect of these weapons that they immediately opened negotiations for surrender. But as Dr. Daniel Ellsberg explains, the start on this path to doomsday did not begin in August 1945. That was but a step of transition.
The transition really started when we accepted the philosophy developed long before Hitler of strategic bombing, that the true targets in wartime were targets for air forces, and those targets were cities. Children, old people, civilians in cities. By destroying them, you destroyed the morale, you destroyed the willingness to fight of the other country. The British were first to implement that policy over Cologne. We joined them in Dresden and Tokyo and elsewhere. No more were armies the primary target of our air forces, but civilians, cities. That removed one of the constraints that civilization had built up, that was shielding us from a human-induced doomsday. The atom bomb then came along as a way of doing that more efficiently, but it didn't really change the level of destruction it was possible to inflict. Just you could do it faster and cheaper. The atom bomb was just the door to a bomb 1,000 times more powerful, the H-bomb, which didn't come really till the mid-50s. With that, and the phenomena of fallout produced by the H-bomb, you targeted not cities anymore, but regions, countries. In fact, you couldn't target much less if you explode those bombs on the ground.
of these early atomic weapons is as nothing compared to the current arsenals amassed by the United States and the Soviet Union. Each possesses the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of those bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A fraction of either of these arsenals could destroy all life on planet Earth.
Every city in Europe, in America, in Russia is now the target of a weapon that's been paid for, designed by Americans or by Russians, produced, deployed, ready to go, most of them on 10 minutes notice. They're there right now.
Thus far, the superpowers have maintained a delicate balance of power. Conventional warfare has continued as a means of settling political disputes, but only through a tacit agreement based on the fear of horrible retaliation have no nuclear weapons been used in any war since 1945. How long can this fragile understanding continue? Civilization is playing a deadly game. Each and every political crisis becomes a round of Russian roulette where the players imperil the fate of the entire world. The number of possible players rises as the nuclear club expands. At the end of World War II, the United States was the only country with atomic weapons. In 1949, the USSR entered the nuclear arena. To be followed by Great Britain in 1952. France in 1960. And Communist China in 1964. By the year 2000, over half the nations of the world may possess the ability to produce nuclear weapons. And if current estimates are realized, there will be sufficient nuclear devices available to annihilate every living creature on Earth hundreds of times over. Imagine a terrorist organization or a lone assassin aiming not a rifle at a nation's leader, but a nuclear weapon targeted for a capital city. Even under the tight control of the current nuclear powers, the threat of a thermonuclear accident is very real.
1961, a 24 megaton bomb was dropped near Goldsboro, North Carolina by a B-52 that crashed. That's 24 million tons of TNT equivalent. We dropped 2 million tons in all of World War II. This was 12 World War IIs in one bomb. Had it gone off, we would have lost North Carolina. In other words, our Harrisburgs, our 3 Mile Islands in connection with nuclear weapons have already occurred.
And the Doomsday countdown continues. Survival for all life demands a suitable and stable environment. Suitable in that basic biological functions are provided for. Stable in that the organism may reproduce itself over time. Man seems small indeed when you consider the tremendously varied species of plants and animals spawned in the vastly different but coexisting environments on Earth. Life as we know it on our planet today is a product of several billion years of evolutionary change. Over the eons of time, animals have adapted or specialized to exist in an environment peculiar to them, providing the basis for a web of life covering the globe. This is the foundation for the food chains of Earth, each level taking nourishment from those below it, each level supporting those above it. But as beautiful and precise as this system is, man has dared to alter it in the name of progress. The Industrial Revolution marked a significant change in the way man lived. Power-driven machinery replaced hand labor. Factories sprang up across the world. Roads and tracks cut ruthlessly across natural landscapes. In his quest for energy, man turned to what he thought was a steady and infinite resource, the Earth. Soon coal had replaced wood in the furnaces and boilers of industry. What precious minerals did not lie on Earth's surface, man burrowed deep into the ground to retrieve. The demand for more energy sources escalated. The age of petroleum dawned in 1859 with the first commercially successful oil well near Titusville, Pennsylvania. Today, 200-foot steel giants replace the 40-foot tall wooden derricks of 100 years ago, reaching ever deeper under the Earth's surface in our frantic search for oil. Heating oil, bottled gas, diesel fuel, and gasoline became additional sources of energy for man to consume. The Earth was thought to contain an inexhaustible supply of fossil fuels, but now we know better. By the year 2000, some experts fear we will have pumped every drop of oil from every well. It will all be gone. Professor Kenneth Watt believes that this could have a devastating effect on countries with high energy demands.
Some people think that if the United States and the world should have sharply reduced availability of crude oil and natural gas, that the United States, being a richer country, would come through the experience better than a poor country, as, for example, India. This may not be true, however. If India were to have sharply reduced availability of crude oil and natural gas, it would really have very little effect on the society. They don't even know what these things are now in many parts of the country. On the other hand, if cities like Los Angeles and Houston were to have sharply reduced availability of crude oil and natural gas, the cities would come to a screeching, grinding halt.
As man continues to produce more and more fuel-consuming machines, he not only is depleting precious finite resources, but is also affecting the very air that sustains life. At one time, man thought the atmosphere to be virtually indestructible, self-replenishing, and immense. But now we know. Like the Earth itself, the atmosphere is an important part of the overall system, which collectively supports all living things. Yet man's technology is slowly destroying this vital element of life. Warnings of the possible consequences have already occurred. In the late 1940s in Donora, Pennsylvania, a thick smog caused 6,000 illnesses and 20 deaths. In the early 1950s, smog-aggravated disease rose significantly in many of America's large cities. In the 1960s, the air of cities once known for their healthful climates suffered serious deterioration. By the 1970s, during heavy smog days, schools restricted student activities. Elderly persons and people with respiratory problems were warned to stay indoors. And in particular, drivers were instructed to curtail unnecessary trips, for automobile exhaust is one of the principal causes of air pollution. Air pollutants are of particular concern to men like Joseph Bidwell, Vice President, General Motors Corporation.
Principal air pollutants that are produced by automobiles are hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, and oxides of nitrogen. Hydrocarbons are really unburned fuel that's gotten through the engine without being combusted. The carbon monoxide is also the result of partial combustion, and its principal effect is diluent in the lungs, so the blood can't pick up quite as much oxygen.
Not only man, but the plants, trees, and the animals around him suffer from bad air. A case in point. In 1968, California citrus growers estimated that crop losses as a result of smog cost them $33 million. Because of the choking smog, rich farmlands produce less. In 1979, this amounted to as much as 50% of the crop damage in some areas. Crops are not the only plant life attacked by smog. The once abundant forests surrounding cities with major air pollution problems have also been adversely affected. The trees take 10 years to die from smog. People take longer. The atmosphere not only provides the precious air we breathe, but also retains the right amount of warmth we need to survive. As the glass of a greenhouse retains and collects heat beneath it, the atmosphere collects and retains heat around the Earth. Since carbon dioxide increases temperature, the more carbon dioxide there is in the atmosphere, the stronger the greenhouse effect. The burning of oil, coal, wood, and gas creates more carbon dioxide. Green plants and trees absorb this and give off oxygen that sustains life. However, as we destroy these resources, the natural cycle is being altered. Man eliminates the amount of vegetation on the Earth by using these resources for energy and by clearing the land for his ever-expanding population. At the same time, the machines of industry give off more carbon dioxide and ever further unbalance this cycle. Dr. Walter Westman has studied the resultant effect of the greenhouse phenomenon on the Earth.
And our problem is that the more energy we use, the more heat we're releasing. And releasing it now at a rate where it is building up in the lower atmosphere faster than it gets dissipated out into the universe. So that, for example, around cities, we're measuring mean annual temperatures as much as 10 degrees Fahrenheit higher than the surrounding unurbanized areas.
What effect will this increase of heat have on our global weather patterns? What do scientists perceive as long-range problems?
Climatologists are estimating that at present rates of increase in energy use, we may find ourselves increasing the global mean temperature by anywhere between 1 and 3 degrees. Now that is a small number, but it's a large enough change to start melting the polar ice caps.
If the polar ice caps do melt, ocean levels all over the world would rise several hundred feet with disastrous results. Many of the world's cities could disappear under the water. As well as the rising waters, weather patterns throughout the world would change dramatically. This could transform normally rich and fertile farmland into deserts, thus adversely affecting the world's food production. Millions of people would starve. The atmosphere also contains another essential element, one that protects all life on Earth, ozone. This element forms a protective shield some 20 miles above the Earth's surface. It serves as a sunscreen, filtering out most of the harmful ultraviolet radiation known as UVB. Too much UVB penetrating to the Earth's surface will endanger plant, animal, and human life. Dr. Daniel Dick of SRI International has studied problems associated with ozone depletion.
Now, there are certain damages that we expect to be associated with that UVB increase. Probably the most notorious would be an increase in skin cancers. And there are several types. There's a melanoma and a non-melanoma. Melanoma tends to be a very bad actor and is fatal in perhaps 40 to 50% of the cases.
The largest cause of skin cancer is overexposure to sunlight. As we damage the ozone layer, the sun's ultraviolet radiation will reach the Earth in increasingly harmful amounts. A rise in skin cancer will be inevitable. The ozone exists in a very narrow shield around the Earth, and man-made chemicals are slowly eating away this protective layer. These products include fluorocarbon propellants in aerosol sprays and freon gas from air conditioners and refrigeration equipment. At the present rate of production of these chemicals, the ozone layer could be depleted by as much as 16% by the year 2000. Dr. Sherwood Rowland was one of the first scientists to discover the effects of man's chemicals on the ozone layer and the resultant increase in ultraviolet radiation.
The increased penetration of sunburn ultraviolet to the surface of the Earth would, of course, have an effect on human beings. But then there are all of the other biological species that are present at the surface of the Earth as well. And these species have grown up under the same protective ozone layer that we have. It would be quite surprising if they aren't sensitive to changes in the amount of sunburn ultraviolet. And that means that we have to worry about the question of whether or not an increase in that ultraviolet might affect crops, it might affect plankton, it might affect any biological species that exists at the surface of the Earth.
When you begin to get changes in food production, this can have significant global effects. And the problem is that the plant biologists simply don't know precisely at what level of ozone depletion some of these things might become significant.
As well as an uncertain timetable for this possible disaster, there is also the need to replace ozone already destroyed in the atmosphere.
And what happens when you come to a problem like the ozone layer, that if you do deplete it with fluorocarbons, that it's not going to be repaired in a matter of 10 years or 20 years. It's going to require a century or more. What we need to do is to forestall these problems. And I just don't think our current industrial society is geared very much toward forestalling problems.
The Industrial Revolution launched man on an exciting voyage. But the destination of that voyage now seems fraught with danger. In a terrifyingly short space of time, we have depleted our atmosphere, disrupted natural food chains, and raped the Earth of its resources. It seems we may not be destined for utopia, but perhaps oblivion. That date of 1999, given by Nostradamus, looms menacingly nearer. and the Doomsday countdown continues. Two-thirds of the world is covered with water, one of the basic requirements for life. As ocean water supports sea life, fresh water supports all life on the land. Yet our spreading technology and our constant demand for new products is resulting in a slow destruction of this essential resource. As Dr. Irving Lyon explains, where pollution is added to any aspect of the environment, it will ultimately affect this most basic requirement of life.
You know, in evaluating the damage to our life support system from all of these contaminants and poisons in the environment, you have to remember that air pollution today is the pollution of our soil and rivers tomorrow and pollution of the oceans the day after.
One example of these hazardous contaminants is DDT, which was used as a pesticide to eliminate crop-damaging insects. DDT was discovered in 1939 and was viewed as the ideal pesticide in the 1940s and 50s. Farm production thrived, but in using this chemical pesticide, man did not consider its long-term consequences on nature's delicate balance. The chemical he spread on the land seeped into the rivers and poisoned underground water supplies. The detrimental effects of DDT first became apparent near a major manufacturing plant in Southern California. After batches of the chemical were produced, wastes were washed into the sewer system and eventually found their way into the ocean. It did not take long before environmental damages became noticeable. For example, the thin eggshell problem in brown pelicans. DDT was also discovered in the fat tissues of certain animals. This accumulation of the chemical could be released all at once during the stress of pregnancy.
And the substances are very toxic because many of them are new to nature. We have invented them in our chemical laboratories, and the natural processes that break down nature's chemicals are not there in the same quantities to break down these strange new chemicals. And so they build up in our food chains, and they can get concentrated in animals that eat plants which had the poisons in them. So that the amount, for example, of DDT found in mother's milk is much larger than the amount of that same substance that you'll find in the air or water.
Another direct effect of DDT was illustrated by the reduced sardine catch off the west coast of the United States. Before 1945, the sardine catch was over 800,000 tons a year. By 1950, it was down to 150,000 tons a year. By 1951, it was non-existent. Studies comparing the death of the sardines with the rise of DDT on nearby farmland showed a direct correlation. In this one instance, it was the very pursuit of greater food production on the land that caused the loss of the sardine crop. DDT was designed as a poison. It did its job almost too well. The history of this pesticide proves we cannot introduce a substance into the environmental system without setting off a chain reaction that affects all life. DDT has been banned in many countries, but dozens of related toxic chemicals appear each year. The effect of toxic substances like DDT on our environment is of concern to government officials involved in public and environmental health. Dr. Donald Lyman.
We'd like to know whether chemicals now in use, being produced now, are toxic or poisonous to human beings. There are problems with that. First is the problem of the numbers of compounds being produced. It's a very large number. Another part of the problem is the nature of the testing itself. We test the chemicals by injecting them into animals and into cell lines in test tubes. But what is safe to an animal or a cell line in a test tube is not necessarily safe to a human being.
And the poisons themselves are not the only problem. When these dangerous chemicals are manufactured, waste byproducts are created, about 92 billion pounds a year. What does man do with these poisonous wastes?
The federal government tells us there may be as many as 3,000 unknown hazardous waste dump sites around the country. These would be places where extremely hazardous waste has been deposited after use for disposal. Now, a number of these substances are probably biodegradable and they will disappear with time. A number of them, though, are not. And some are known to be highly dangerous and toxic. You can be poisoned when these things leach into the groundwater surrounding the dump site. You can be poisoned through that. You may breathe it in. But as dangerous substances known to be hazardous to your health, there is a human threat implied.
Considers all the toxic materials and poisons that we're pouring out into our environment, our life support system, it's not hard to imagine that we're going to come to a day fairly soon when one will take a glass of water or try to take a breath of air and think to oneself, can I really do this because I know that I'm going to be poisoning myself? And yet, what choice would we have?
And the Doomsday countdown continues. As our lives became increasingly industrialized, we needed more and more energy to power our society. Each facet of our lives, from the simplest to the most complex machine, depended on nature's resources: wood, coal, oil, and minerals. As our technology grew, we were able to harness more volatile, more explosive resources. In 1955, nuclear energy was used for the first time to produce commercial electricity. Proponents of the atom claimed it was clean, efficient, inexpensive, and safe. It seemed almost too good to be true. As we learned more about this new energy source, as we developed the complex mechanisms necessary to harness its powers, we came upon problems, frightening problems. The nuclear reactor is based on a very simple principle of heat exchange. The reactor heats water, the water turns to steam, and the steam turns generators to make electricity. The frightening dangers in nuclear energy come from the reaction process itself. Nuclear fission produces incredible heat. Even after the plant is turned off, it still produces substantial energy. An elaborate cooling system is designed to both monitor and control the nuclear reaction. Should the system fail, temperatures in the reactor would soar. The consequences would be disastrous. In 1976, 3 men resigned from a major manufacturer of nuclear plants, partly because of their fears for reactor safety. Nuclear engineer Richard Hubbard was one of them.
Now, inside that core of the reactor, there's the radiation equivalent to 1,000 Hiroshima bombs. If you took the water away, within minutes, the fuel would start to melt. It would start to give off the radiation. There's various scenarios developed of how the pressure might build up such that that reactor pressure vessel would rupture and come out through then sending that out through the containment, and would eventually have a cloud of radiation. That would be the worst possible accident. The China syndrome sort of accident was the fuel would start to melt. It would then fall down to the bottom of the pressure vessel, and that's like a pressure cooker that the reactor is housed in. It'd take about an hour, it'd melt through that steel container, then it would fall down to the concrete at the base of the reactor building. And it'd take about 20-some hours to melt through that concrete and then into the groundwater, and some of it might have enough energy, it would come up through the soil, through fissures, and we'd get the radiation that way.
Unfortunately, the dangers of nuclear energy are not theoretical. There is already a tragic history of accidents. November 1977, 60,000 gallons of contaminated water leaks into the Columbia River near Seattle, Washington. 1 month later, radioactive fuel leaks into an elevator. 4 technicians are contaminated. October 1966, an experimental breeder reactor partially melts down when a cooling system jams. For months, officials feared the fuel would melt further. There was talk of evacuating the population of Detroit. 1961, nuclear energy claims its first human victims. The site, the Atomic Energy Commission's National Reactor Testing Station, 40 miles outside of Idaho Falls, Idaho. The following information regarding this nuclear accident has been obtained from official government records. The scenes you are about to see were compiled from government films. The reactor, known as SL-1, was designed to service remote military installations with power and space heat. Its capacity was 200 kilowatts of electricity, enough to serve the needs of about 200 people. The time is 9:01 p.m., January 3rd, 1961. Alarms sound at Fire Station Number 1, Fire Station Number 2, and the Communications Center of the Atomic Energy Commission's Idaho Operations Office. 9:11 p.m. Firemen arrive at the reactor. It looks to be deserted. A telephone call to the control room brings no response. All gates to the area are padlocked. A guard arrives to unlock the door to the administration building. There is still no evidence of personnel, fire, or smoke. Radiation, however, is detected. 9:20 p.m. The assistant fire chief notifies the operating contractor. It is confirmed that 3 personnel are on duty somewhere in the reactor building. 9:36 p.m. 2 health physicists arrive. A 2-man team makes an effort to locate the 3 missing men. The control room is deserted. As they continue toward the reactor, their radiation detection equipment flashes almost off the scale, past 200 R per hour. R, or REM, is a radiation measurement. The average person receives up to 5 REMs of radiation exposure per year. This comes from natural background radiation, medical X-rays, and the like. 200 REMs per hour translates into more than 40 years of naturally accumulated radiation exposure in 1 hour. That is what these men are being exposed to in some parts of the building. Acting quickly, they managed to spot 2 of the technicians, one dead. The other appears to be still alive. A 5-man team returns to the reactor room and rescues the man still alive. "11:14 p.m. An AEC doctor pronounces the man dead. Later that same night, another team discovers the missing 3rd technician. He is lodged in the ceiling, dead. With the 3 men accounted for, there is time to institute further safety controls. The rescue teams themselves must first be decontaminated. Daybreak. The skies above the site are monitored for airborne radioactivity. The reactor building exterior must be surveyed from the ground. Fire and ambulance equipment must be decontaminated. Medical checkups of entry personnel are carried out. The greatest of precautions must be taken for people working in contaminated areas, including face masks, badges to measure radiation, 2 pairs of gloves, 2 pairs of shoe covers, and 2 sets of protective clothing. All openings in garments must be taped to prevent seepage of contamination. The teams are thoroughly briefed. A 1-minute time limit is set for all work in high radiation areas. January 4th. Plans are laid to remove one of the 2 men inside the reactor room. The teams work in 2-man relays. The first carry the body from the reactor operating floor to the control room. The second take the body from the control room to the outside. January 5th. It is approximately 36 hours after the accident. Direct radiation checkpoints covering the entire SL1 site are surveyed every 2 hours. Official photographers, accompanied by health physicists, enter the high radiation zone at the outer edges of the reactor to obtain pictures crucial to the removal of the 3rd body. Working in radiation fields of 500 rems per hour, equivalent to 100 years of naturally accumulated radiation, each photographer is limited to only 30 seconds of picture taking. Using these photos, preparations are made for the recovery of the 3rd victim. The body cannot be removed by direct methods. It is situated where radiation levels are at their most intense, directly above the reactor. It is decided to improvise a long mechanical arm that can reach the freight doors at the 2nd-story level of the reactor building to retrieve the body. January 9th, 6 days after the accident, the remains are transported to a shielded facility for decontamination. Comprehensive medical studies conclude that 2 of the men were killed instantly. The 3rd died of multiple injuries, all received at the time of the accident. The burial caskets are lined with lead sheeting to permit shipment. Early calculations show that the total energy released in the accident was equivalent to between 2 and 10 pounds of TNT. Cleanup operations continue. Beginning shortly after the accident, the access road to the reactor is regularly scanned for contamination. Wherever possible, vacuum cleaners are used to remove radioactive materials. Radiological crews identify the hot spots. In some instances, the radiation is leached into the soil with water hoses. In stubborn cases, it is necessary to seal the road surface with resin or neoprene sprays to prevent the spread of contamination. Repeated surveys and samplings of animal life, milk, vegetation, air, water, and soil in the surrounding county reveal very little contamination. It is decided to dismantle the building, remove the reactor vessel for further analysis, and return the site to a habitable condition. A study confirms the desirability of opening a burial ground specifically for the SL-1 reactor debris. 81,000 cubic feet of space are required. The operating cabs of the transporting vehicles are enclosed in lead to protect the drivers from exposure to radiation. But what caused the SL-1 explosion? Where did the error occur? The reactor core was transported in a shielded cask over public roads to a nearby analysis lab, where extensive testing was performed. The direct cause of the accident appears to have been manual withdrawal of the central control rod blade by one or more of the crew members, considerably beyond the limits specified in maintenance procedures. This action increased the temperature, rapidly producing steam in the surrounding water. The steam pushed a slug of water upward from the core. As it struck the reactor vessel, the vessel jumped 9 feet. This sequence of events took less than 4 seconds. Final conclusions determined that this accident, which resulted in a partial meltdown, was caused by human error. This accident occurred on January 3rd, 1961. It took 18 months to complete the recovery program. Over 1,200 people participated in the operation. 790 of these worked in radiation fields at the SL-1 reactor site. The overall recovery program cost $2.5 million. Losses in capital equipment totaled another $1.5 million. Though the SL-1 was a small reactor, the number of people required for cleanup and the costs involved were substantial. One can imagine what might happen if today, not an SL-1, but one of our modern massive reactors with 1,000 times the generating capabilities were to melt down. The potential dangers are virtually incomprehensible. Although current nuclear reactor technology and safety systems have greatly improved since the SL-1 accident in 1961, in March 1979, a meltdown almost occurred at the 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Human error has also been cited in its near disastrous conclusion. 10 million people were prepared for evacuation.
If a meltdown had occurred at 3 Mile Island, it's very possible that this molten mass would have gone right straight through the reactor vessel, the containment, and down into the ground, hit the water table, and there would have undergone a horrendous explosion, and it would have contaminated almost the entire waterway, serving the drinking water needs and irrigation needs of millions of people in the areas toward New York and possibly down into the upper mid-Atlantic states. The stuff that would have been spewed out into the air would have poisoned the entire atmosphere, perhaps for hundreds of square miles around.
The a major impact of radiation is not prompt deaths. It kills you over a long period of time. There'd be 45,000 additional deaths over the next 30 to 40 years. There would be thousands of cases of genetic defects, which would go on for generations.
A nuclear plant meltdown would truly be catastrophic. However, reactor accidents are only one of the dangers presented by nuclear energy. Reactor fuel, once its energy is spent, nevertheless remains highly radioactive. Some portions of it remain toxic for thousands of years. How can we safely eliminate these waste products? If we bury them, their containers might be damaged by earthquakes or erosion. If we drop them into the sea, how can we be certain that the containers will remain intact for the thousands of years necessary for total safety? If we shoot them into space, anything can happen. Certain types of nuclear reactors create plutonium as a byproduct. Plutonium is one of the key elements in nuclear weapons.
In the middle 1970s, we were told, well, the commercial nuclear fuel, you really can't make a bomb out of that material. And the thought was that it was just so difficult to do that you couldn't get weapons proliferation from commercial nuclear plants. Well, in the mid-1970s, India actually made an atomic weapon out of their fuel from a test reactor. And then after the California Nuclear Initiative in 1976, through the Freedom of Information Act, it came out that the United States had actually tested weapons made with nuclear-grade fuel. And so we found that not only could we do it, the U.S. government had actually demonstrated that it could be done.
Since 1945, we have utilized the tremendous power of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. But in doing so, we have increased the number of doomsday possibilities, meltdown, atomic waste, and the potential for more nuclear weapons. So far, none of these potential dangers has come to pass. But the possibility of a nuclear catastrophe has, without a doubt, been multiplied. And the doomsday countdown continues. 2,000 years ago, 250 million people lived on planet Earth. 1,000 years later, the total had only reached 275 million. Yet less than 1,000 years later, in 1900, the world's population had more than tripled to 1 billion people. And since then, it has quadrupled.
All 4 billion of us live in a very tiny world, and we're rapidly filling it up. We're doubling our population currently every 35 years. But in many countries of the world, especially Latin America and many African countries, the population doubles every 20 years, which means that just to maintain their present level of poverty, those people must double their schools and roads and homes and factories in just 20 years.
We are already feeling the effects of this population crunch: human suffering, environmental disaster, political turmoil. Dr. Garrett Hardin has closely examined the plight of governments and how they deal with this problem.
Many political problems are, in essence, population problems. They appear to us to be political because that's the way we've been used to thinking of them. But we should start looking at the population side, too. The countries of Southeast Asia are increasing at about 2.5% per year, which is higher than the world average of 2%. What is such a country to do with the excess people that are being produced in this way? The group that is in power politically tries to solve its general population problem by selectively getting rid of the people it doesn't like. In Vietnam, that means that they're trying to get rid of the Chinese, about 1.5 million of them. And when these people get out, they get in boats and try to land in Hong Kong or Singapore or the Philippines or some other place, but these places are also crowded.
We now double our population every 35 years. At this rate, in just a few centuries, there will be only 1 square yard of land for each one of us. All over the world, rapid population growth has altered the way people live by encouraging a tremendous expansion in technology. However, progress, as we call it, has its price, often hidden. Even as doctors labor in the most technologically advanced hospital facilities, researchers discover connections between our fast-paced technological lifestyles and diseases such as cancer. To ease and please the lives of more and more of us, we have produced over 2 million artificial chemical compounds, and yet only 6,000 of these have in fact been tested to see if they cause cancer. Fully 1/3 of them do. For example, chromates, used in paints for school buses and road striping, have been linked to lung cancer. Vinyl chlorides, used in plastics, have been linked to cancer of the liver. These manufactured chemical compounds are so widely used, it's nearly impossible to remove them from our lives. Even so, as Dr. Gussie Higgins explains, some people knowingly increase the risk.
The substances, the triggers that create the cancer are the irritants that affect the normal cell, that causes the mutation, and the cancer develops. For instance, lung cancer, 30 years ago, was a rare cancer. Now it is the #1 cancer in adult men, and it's also been noted to increase in women, and this is directly related to the smoking.
These cancer-causing elements in our lives compound each other. As the poisons mount, the ability of our bodies to fight them off is undermined. How long do we have before these overwhelm us? Dr. Linus Pauling, 2-time Nobel Prize winner, describes the crisis.
We know that many cancers are caused by the pollution of our environment, by chemicals, by the use of high-energy radiation unnecessarily. The estimates differ. Some people say that 80% of all cancers are man-made.
We are in a time of crisis. We need all our mental resources to see our way through. And yet, on the one hand, we are bombarded by all the wonders of the electronic age: television, computers, automation. And on the other hand, we are threatened by an ominous blanket of invisible smog: electromagnetic energy. There are thousands of broadcasting transmitters, thousands of radar dishes, tens of thousands of miles of overhead high-voltage lines. Millions of microwave ovens, tens of millions of CB radios, millions of electronic devices for industry, all permeating the environment around us. Just how much of a threat is this? Initial studies prove alarming. High-tension wires provide a clear example. As far away as 500 feet, radiated energy can affect blood chemistry and heart rhythms. Even 1,000 feet away, human behavior is altered as reaction times lag. In Finland, the number of cancer cases dramatically increased when a large radar station was installed just across the Russian border. Laboratory experiments on animals by Soviet scientists have shown that electronic radiation affects almost every bodily system. Microwaves produce chromosomal damage, embryos subjected to electronic radiation displayed brain damage and deformed spinal cords. This electronic radiation is all around us. Just how much can we take?
Not only does radiation cause damage to our bodies and to our environment, but other things in our environment, like a whole host of chemicals, also cause damage to our bodies and our environment. For example, these include pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, smog, smoking, manufacturing, processing chemicals, and so on, and the burial sites in and around where people live. So it isn't a question of just getting a biological damaging effect or an insult from radiation, but you can get these damaging effects from all of these materials. And since they are all hitting us in any part of our environment, wherever we are, you get the additive effect of all of them together. And that is really worse than any one of them or any group of them.
And the Doomsday Countdown continues. We live in a finite world. Each day we seem to be thrust even closer together. Our society overwhelms us with complexities, our economy with fears and insecurities. The social environment is slowly poisoned, and as we struggle to cope, our minds become more confused, threatened and intimidated. Is it any wonder that we feel lost and helpless?
We're all living in conditions of very, very, very high stress, and that creates neurosis itself. First place, there's the breakdown of all of our ancient ideas and myths about who we are and our religious ideas. We don't have the comfort of that. We don't have common belief.
We do share a common bond, our troubles, and share in the escapes from them. However, our ultimate goal still remains the good life.
That the dominant belief system in this culture at the moment is preoccupied with what the person can consume rather than with what they can produce for the rest of society. I find this situation most worrisome. A sign in the past when civilizations have been about to disintegrate was that almost everybody was concerned with what they could consume rather than with what they could produce.
This urge toward consumption and toward getting more and more and more is also a psychological stress of considerable importance.
Dr. Roderick Gorney, psychiatrist, is a specialist in psychosocial behavior.
Because it means that the person is constantly testing himself against his score of last year. Did his income go up? Did he have more? Did he eat more? Did he use more? Is he richer? Is he ahead of everybody else on the block? The emphasis on winning and on besting other people constitutes a serious stress for many people because that's how they live every day, every week, every year. And of course, in that way, if you measure your worthwhileness as a person, there is no end point at which you finally feel satisfied.
We seem locked in a bitter struggle to give meaning and significance to our lives. We turn against ourselves. We turn against our neighbors. All too often, we find ourselves instead caught in a depressing loneliness.
So many of the depressed people in our society are in some sense prophetic. Their depression is telling us something very valuable about the world, that we have to live in ways that are more affectionate and more loving and more bonded, or we will destroy ourselves.
Suicide. Between 1960 and 1976, the suicide rate in America rose 20%. During this period, over 2 million people attempted suicide. Corinne Hatton is a mental health counselor who has worked extensively in studying suicide.
Suicide is a worldwide problem. The United States ranks about 15th. But some of the other countries that have a higher rate of suicide are Canada, West Germany, Hungary, and Japan. We have seen an increase in suicide among the young between the ages of 15 to 25 in the last 10 years. However, the increase has now dropped so that we've even seen an increase among the preteen population. And of course, parents are always concerned. These families feel pressured from the media, from schools, from their peers, that they were to blame for this young person's suicide.
In 1978, the world is shocked by the largest mass suicide in history. Nearly 1,000 men, women, and children take their lives in Jonestown, Guyana. Millions around the world watch in disbelief as television unfolds the gruesome story.
In some ways, the strange thing about the whole suicide at Jonestown was people's reaction that they didn't understand how such a thing could possibly happen. Because if you look at it, you find out that every nation, in essence, asks its citizens to be willing to commit suicide and or to commit murder in the name of security and in the name of loyalty to that nation.
We all live in Guyana now, I would say. And the solution, as I see it, is to do what the parents in Jonestown should have done. When they heard their leader telling them, trust me, I'll decide when the rehearsals are no longer rehearsal. I'll decide when to put the cyanide in the Kool-Aid. I'll decide when the time has come for us all to meet in another place. That's what each of our leaders is telling us when he says, trust me. The time has come to say what those parents should have said. This is crazy. Not with our children. Not with our lives.
Sad to think that someday this will all be gone, that the sun will gradually expand until it reaches the earth, and all of this will be finished, over. It's not just sad, it's very frightening to me to realize that we might not have to wait 5 billion years for this to happen, that it could happen within our lifetime. There's so many ways that we can do it. It is frightening. And it's no wonder that the people we talked with are so serious about trying to find ways to stop the doomsday countdown. They know that unlike the death of the sun, these doomsday scenarios have been created by us. We have barely scratched the surface of some of the worst problems, but at least we've taken the first crucial step by recognizing that those problems do in fact exist.
We don't have as much of an energy crisis in this country as we have a gluttony crisis. You know, we often see the statistics. We have 6% of the world's population. We use 33% of the world's energy. Now, I think back to when I was a boy. At that time, we were erecting tariffs to keep foreign oil out. This was just 20 years ago. We wanted to use our own first. Well, now we're seeing that we treated energy like it was a throwaway commodity, not a capital. And we've used it very wastefully. So the thing that we can do is, again, back to individual responsibility. We can start insulating our homes. We can get cars that have better gas mileage. We can demand that, and that's what Detroit will build, so we'll use less oil. We can use solar heaters for our hot water, and we'll save energy, and we'll save money. There's plenty of materials, and there's plenty of food, and there's plenty of water, if we take individual responsibility. And that means we can't wait for the government to tell us, and we can't wait for science to solve the problem. What we need to do is take that individual responsibility and begin to change the way we use our resources. And if we do that, then there will be a society for us to give to our children.
Our industrialized society has brought us many obvious benefits, but the problems associated with this industrialization are also very serious. Some of the most complex have to do with the introduction of elements which are highly toxic into the environment, elements which enter the water systems, enter our food chains, and eventually could cause serious health problems.
In the last 10 years, we have been addressing this problem. We have a hazardous waste program that is working. We have been addressing the problems. It takes a long time, but it's beginning to work.
Though DDT was banned a few years ago, we continue to use large amounts of related pesticides that are equally toxic. But if we take this as a challenge to our own ingenuity, for each of us to look around and decide what is it that we can do to walk more lightly on our environment, then we may have the seeds of some new and maybe even better approach to solving our environmental problems.
If the human race is going to survive, as I believe, then we have to see to it that there are not so many people on Earth that they can't be well-fed and well-clothed and well-housed and have the opportunities for education and for recreation, for leading a good life.
As far as the future is concerned, there's only one solution to this problem. We've got to stabilize the whole situation and then take a very close look at everything that we're doing, evaluating them carefully and analytically, seeing what things that we can phase out and do without and do so, and see what things we have to keep and improve and do that. And that, to me, is the only way we're going to get out of this box that we're in.
We can wake up from this bad dream. We can invest our monies and our resources in recreating our communities, in making our land fertile again, in waging peace rather than in waging war, in creating a whole generation that will live by appropriate technologies and live modestly and simply, and find that indeed that a slower and more modest way of living is a much more pleasurable way of living.
In fact, all the people we talked with were optimistic. Each of them expects the problems he described to be solved. Each of them is ready to help, however and whenever he can. The rest is up to us. can produce. We have proven that. It is our very power to create that has gotten us into trouble. But we still have time to make a choice. We are at the end of something, yes, but we are also at the exciting beginning of something as well. Maybe man is ready now to explore a different and more responsible way of life. Man has already reached for the stars. What other marvels could he contemplate and ultimately devise were he free to direct his whole thinking and being in harmony with nature and with the universe? Nature offers freedom, beauty, abundance, and peace. Are these what lie ahead for us? There was one man among the experts who seemed very calm, very confident about the shape of things to come. Astronaut David Scott is not really different from you or me, but he has seen things that we have not. He was given the opportunity to see our planet in a new way, a way we all must see it if we are to survive.
Well, I believe all of us who have had the opportunity to look at the Earth from space and see this fragile blue ball suspended in the blackness of the universe and the only color out there, realize that this is the only place that mankind really has a home. And therefore we believe, and I think most of the people on the Earth believe, that we have to take care of that resource in order to sustain it, in order to be able to live on it in the future. Within the last 10 years since we first landed on the moon, we've all been able to develop more of a historical perspective of what that means. And I think, again, we've learned that we can transcend the limit. We can go beyond what seemed to be impossible 10 years ago. And we can apply that thinking and philosophy to what goes on in the Earth. And I think the future of the Earth is very bright. There are many, many opportunities. There are many barriers that we can break down now. And I think when you look back 100 years from now or 200 years from now, the historical perspective will be that that's a period when we really had a dawn, when things began to awaken, when people became aware of their surroundings and their Earth and their resources and their environment. And then that stimulant enabled them to progress on to where I think our society and civilization in 100 or 200 years will be much more productive, enjoyable, longer living, and happy than it is even today.
Mankind has reached a critical crossroads where each of us must bear a responsibility for what will happen. The experts' optimism is based on our assuming that responsibility. If we each respond positively to the challenges we face, if we each are prepared to make the necessary changes and the necessary sacrifices, then we can escape from the apocalyptic visions that threaten our future. But we must act soon, for time is running out, and the Doomsday countdown continues.
Very definitely an optimist. It's going to always be tomorrow.
Changes of attitudes, changes in people's heads.
Think a little bit more about each other, and I don't think Doomsday will ever arrive.
The threat of Doomsday is always the prelude to a new opportunity. This is the way the universe has of renewing itself.